All right, this is an introduction to the assignment of the chemical history of a candle, which is a 5-week project that we're kicking off this week in class. Um, so this is just the instructions on what this project is, some advice and guidelines on how to do it. So first of all, let's talk about the project as a whole. The due date for it is going to be Friday, February 11th. So you can see at the bottom of your page, your handout, you've got a place to write that in. What you are doing in this project is you're watching a series of 5 videos, one per week, that take you through scientific observational methods that are used by Michael Faraday. I'll tell you more about him in just a minute. But you're watching a required video each week, which has a length of 13 minutes to about 20 minutes, where uh, Faraday is explaining a concept. And then you are uh, using that information and processing it and writing out a formatted paper on that. So I'm going to describe the format in just a second. But what you need to know is every Friday, or at least after class on Thursday, if I'm a little early, I'm going to post a link to the required video for you to watch. Additionally, I will post a link to a second video, which is a commentary on the lecture. That commentary video is not required, but it's there if you would like to listen to it. Additionally, I've posted a document which is the transcription of all 5 of the lectures. There's some other stuff in the document too, but for our purposes, what you need to know is there's one file that will have the transcription of the 5 lectures. So that way, if you feel like you didn't catch something in a lecture or want to go back and refresh, you're welcome to just go through and look through that document. The other thing that is really good about the book is there are times when he's describing what's going on, for example, within the flame, and the book will have a diagram and clearly show you exactly where Faraday is talking about at that moment. Versus when you're sort of looking at the candle going, I think he's talking about this right there, but I'm not really sure. So it's really good to go ahead and look through those transcripts as well. The transcripts are not required, but they are recommended. So again, that's one recommended video, one commentary video that's optional, and then one transcript, and that is recommended, but not absolutely required. So you're watching one of those per week, you're recording your observations and etc., which I'll tell you about in a very distinct format, and then you'll be turning it in at the end of the 5 week period. So Friday, February 11th. Now, the thing about that is this: there are no checkpoints in this project. And what that means is it is up to you to keep up with everything. Keep it going so that you don't fall too far behind. This would be an incredibly difficult project to do at the last minute. So please do your best to keep up on a week by week basis. Now, this document describes all of that. It talks about a 3-2-1 format, okay? And what that means is with every video that you watch, you are to make 3 observations, 2 things you find interesting, and 1 question you have. So you're going to do that for each video. Let's look at the rubric, and that'll make a little bit more sense. Here on page 2 is the rubric. And what you can see is here are our videos listed here. Here's how I would grade them. And then you are, where it says 3-2-1, that is what I'm referring to, where it's asking for your observations, your interesting items, and then 1 question. Now note this too, in addition to the 5 videos, you've got a little bit of work up front, you've got a little bit of work at the end. So up front, what you are to do and what you can do day one as soon as you see this is grab a candle. It can be any candle, but I really recommend a candle that is uh, either tapered or flat or pointed upward where the wick is a little bit higher than the rest of the camera. And the reason for that is you're going to want to really watch the flame. And some of these, the wick is sort of in a gully and the flame is just drowning in wax. And I'd prefer that you have one where the wax can sort of fall away from the wick as needed. That might be you getting in the kitchen with a little knife and cutting a candle a little bit more so it'll have that slope away from the wick. So just be careful as you use a knife. But um, so day one, again, you can do that today, is just observations. Now, only 3 observations are required in this rubric. However, what I will tell you is on day one, it would be really, really good to make as many observations as you can. It would just make this project a lot more enjoyable. Where when Faraday starts talking about a particular characteristic of the flame, you could go, ha ha, I thought of that too, Michael Faraday. Ha. So I do recommend that, although you only need 3, that you keep going and just list as many observations as you can. Now, what are they looking for with an observation? They're looking for things like what is the shape of the the flame? The what sort of exhaust is produced? And can the exhaust ever vary? Where does the exhaust seem to go? Um, what colors are involved? Do the colors ever change? What happens when an external force comes against the flame in some spot? What happens with that? So you're thinking very holistically and in a very detailed manner about what is going on with that candle burning. So, the movement, are you seeing any movement that takes place? What is it in particular that is moving? And then what might be going on that I can't see is another question. So, your observations are things that you can see, but you might notice, for example, things are reducing in some way. And why would that be? So, that might be the type of questions that you're looking for with that. So, observations up front, then 5 weeks of the video, following the 3-2-1 process for your documentation. And then note this, there's some end work that's very important. And that is at the end of the 5 weeks or starting toward the end of the project, you can start answering your questions. So you're to go back to some of your questions that you were posing up here and say, aha, here's what I learned, and write out what the answer to your question is. Okay, so there's 3 answered questions there. Additionally, the other reason you do not want to delay is there's a visual component here. And you can see that of a project that has 100 points total, the visual component is worth 25 points. So it's really valuable and something not to be skimped. But what we're looking for is a visual graphic. Now, though that term in general is very imprecise, but what we're really talking about is a, a picture. Okay, so it can't be like a PowerPoint slide that lists all of the topics covered. We're looking for more of a visual representation of picture to show what has been happening in this project, and it's to show as many of the main concepts and principles in that graphic as you possibly can. So you can go all sorts of directions with that, but those are the parameters that we're asking you to achieve with that. So as of right now, this project, the first week's required video, the first week's optional video, and the file that has all the transcripts are all out on CDA Connect, and they're out there with a due date of Friday, February 11th. So let me show you real quickly the format of what I'm expecting. So It says in these directions I just showed you to put it in your notebook. Well, you don't have a notebook now, do you? So what you can do is just use a piece of paper. It can be lined, it can be unlined, whatever you want to work with. But I do want things in this format. So I want it very, very organized. Title, and then day one, and then indented from there are your observations. Again, day one observations. I would get as many as you can. That'll make this project much more fun and interesting. Interesting things, again, get as many as you can, and then at least one question. And then video one, out here, you're out here at the margin again, you're indenting, and you're doing the same thing for each of your videos. And then at the end, obviously, you're answering your own questions, and then you are attaching your beautiful artwork that you're going to create. So that's that. That's that project. Here, I'll leave this up so you can look at it a little bit more, because I want to tell you a little bit about Michael Faraday. He was such an amazing, amazing man. He lived from 1791 to 1867. So think of him as being born about the time the Constitution was ratified, um, and the French Revolution was going on, and then dying just a little bit after the Civil War. He was an Englishman. He was born to a family who was pretty poor. There was no money to educate him. And so he became apprenticed to a bookseller, or excuse me, a book printer when he was 14 years old. And he was so brilliant. He read every book he could, especially those on science, really interested him. From there, he met scientists that were coming in to work in the books, to pick up books from the book printer, and made relationships with them. There was a scientist who was doing a chemistry experiment who accidentally semi blinded himself so that he couldn't read and he couldn't really see to measure chemicals. And so he became pretty useless for his eyes, but he still had a great mind. So he needed an assistant. And he saw Faraday as the perfect assistant. So Faraday worked for this chemist for quite a while, did some amazing work with him. And then that chemist, who was very preeminent, was asked to select someone to work with the Royal Society. And he nominated Michael Faraday, even though Faraday was still a very young man. So he's just amazing. If you look him up in Wikipedia, what you find is there are 24 inventions uh, that he's been credited with. Um, some of them, the one that he's most famous for is he came up with the basic law of electromagnetism. So, and that's basically saying that a magnetic field interacts with an electrical current. So you'll be learning more about that when you're in physics as a senior. But in essence, that's what you can use to produce an electromotive force. So when you think about where did electric motors come from, they came from Faraday's initial principles on that. Generators, same thing. Solenoids, same thing. All came from his basic law of electromagnetism. The other thing he came up with, which we've already learned about, is he was the man who realized that magnetism affects streams of light. An amazing discovery for that time frame. And so he was really the first man to get the sense that there really is an electromagnetic spectrum. And then thirdly, he came up with the laws of electrolysis, which that's something we haven't gotten into yet, but we will later this year. So good to know. And he was also the man who came up with the initial idea of a Bunsen burner. So a really brilliant guy. The other thing I want you to know about him was he was very devout, and he believed that God and science are thoroughly in unison together. And you know, if you think about it, there are people who believe in an intellectual assent space, and then there are people who believe and actually say they believe in their own words. And but the real test of whether someone is living their faith is how they act. And boy, Faraday was just an extremely impressive man in that he turned down being a knight. He turned down knighthood, which was the biggest honor in the kingdom, because he felt like God had created all men equally valuable in God's eyes, and therefore he should not become a knight. He turned down being president of England's Royal Society, which was the preeminent scientific group in the world at that time. He turned it down not once, but twice. And then the other thing that he did was near the end of his life, the Crimean War was going on. He was asked by the British government to develop chemical weapons, which would cause mass woundings of soldiers, and he refused to do that. So, anyway, that's who he was. He came out with this lecture series on the history of a candle in 1848. It was insanely popular, and he gave it several times for several years, as a matter of fact. And someone transcribed his words verbatim. And what you're going to be watching in this project are Faraday's own words. There has been some editing to take out some things that are really sort of extraneous to us today, and also to update the words a little bit to make them a little bit more comprehensible to us. But in general, what you're listening to is exactly what Faraday said when you watch these videos. So that's who he was. If you have questions, I'll be taking questions up until you turn it in, but these are the guidelines on what to do.